Identifying and reporting possible child abuse and neglect is an important responsibility of community members. Because of this, each state, including Colorado, has developed laws that state there are certain members of society who are required to report suspected child abuse and neglect. Mesa County Child Protective Services has developed these training modules to assist these mandated reporters in completing this legal obligation. Welcome and thank you for joining us for Part 3 of this 4-part series on the identification and reporting of child abuse and neglect. In this segment, we will discuss mandated reporting and what the law says about mandated reporters and how to make a report. These laws can be found in Title 19 of the Colorado Revised Statutes, which is commonly referred to as the Colorado Children's Code.
Every state, including Colorado, has laws set up surrounding what are called mandated reporters. Basically, what a mandated reporter is any professional, usually someone working with children, who's mandated by law to report suspected child abuse and neglect. What that means is if you are a mandated reporter, you are required under Colorado law to report suspected child abuse or neglect. You don't have to know that a child is being abused or neglected, only suspect it. If you're a mandated reporter, what the law says is that you must report suspected child abuse or neglect immediately upon receipt of that report. You can do that either by calling the Child Protection Hotline, and we'll give you that information for Mesa County. You can also do that by calling law enforcement. If you report on the Child Protection Hotline, your information as the reporting party remains confidential. It is protected by law. The only time that information can be released would be through a court order. As a mandated reporter, you are also required to follow up your verbal report with a written report within 24 hours. So you want to call the Child Protection Hotline or law enforcement, then follow up that verbal report with a written report in 24 hours. When you call the Child Protection Hotline, you're going to be asked for some specific information. If you have a file or someplace where you keep information on the child and the family, it's a good idea to have that information available, because we will be asking for some pretty detailed information. Obviously, if you don't have the information, that's fine, but we'll ask you to try and get as much as possible. We're going to ask things like the child's name, age, date of birth if you have it, their home address, what school they attend. If the child is not school-aged yet, we'll ask you if they attend daycare. The other thing we'll ask you is for any other children in the home. The reason we do that is because when we investigate child abuse and neglect, we're not only investigating the situation or the actual incident of abuse or neglect, we're also investigating the safety of all the children in the home. We'll ask you for the parents' information. If the parents are not living together, we'll try to get information on both parents. If at all possible, we'll also ask for any other adults living in the home or other members of the household. We'll want to have as much information as possible on the person who is suspected of causing the child abuse or neglect, whether that be a parent or guardian or whether that be someone else. Other things that we'll ask for are detailed information about the incident itself. Now, you may not have all of the details of the information. What we're going to ask you for is as much as you have to give. There are some specific laws in Colorado about what happens if you do and don't make a report as a mandated reporter. The law holds you harmless if you're a mandated reporter and make a report in good faith. What that means is if you, in good faith, report suspected child abuse or neglect, that you are held harmless from any criminal or civil liability as a result of that report. You also cannot be terminated from your job. On the other hand, if you are a mandated reporter and you don't report suspected child abuse or neglect, there are a couple of things that can happen. You can be charged with a Class 3 misdemeanor, which is a criminal offense. The other thing is that you can be held liable for any civil damages caused as a result of not making the report. What that means is if you suspect or know about child abuse or neglect that was going on and do not make that report, and that child ends up, for instance, in some kind of treatment for that, you might have to pay for that treatment if you knew about the abuse and didn't report it. So it's really important as a mandated reporter that you do report suspected child abuse and neglect. When you make a report, one of the common questions we get asked is, how much information should I get from the child? What you're trying to do is get just enough information to know if there is suspected abuse or neglect. It's okay to ask the child questions. For instance, if the child has some bruising on their upper arm that looks suspiciously like fingerprints, you can just mention to the child, "Hey, what happened?" Then the child can give you more information about that. It's possible they got the bruises playing around with a friend. It's possible, however, that the bruises did come from abuse. So it's important to get that information. You do not have to do a detailed interview with the child. That is our job as child protection team. So you want to get basically enough information to determine if this is a reasonable report to make, but you do not have to get detailed information.
Hi, I'm Rob Washington. I'm a recently retired counselor from School District 51. I've been asked to talk about reporting child abuse and neglect for school employees and also discuss some of the reasons why school employees are sometimes hesitant to make a report when we should. I want you to know that it's normal to feel conflicted about reporting suspected child abuse. It's unusual for a student to come forward and clearly state to a teacher or school person that he has been hit, choked, burned, or injured in some way by an adult, and then go on to tell you that it left an abrasion, a burn, or a bruise. Nor do kids often come forward and say they are left alone at night with no supervision and without a safety plan in place. Much more likely, students will say something vague like, "I wish my mom or stepdad or dad would be nicer," or "My mom goes to the bar and stays out." We, the school employee, are left with an uncomfortable feeling that maybe this student isn't safe or is being hurt in some way, or that the student may be injured, and we have to ask some questions in order to determine if a report needs to be made to the Department of Human Services or law enforcement. Even if a student's disclosure is straightforward and a bruise or an abrasion is evident, it's not uncommon to feel uncomfortable about making a child abuse referral. We may feel awkward about getting somebody in trouble, perhaps a parent that we've come to know. Perhaps we believe this parent couldn't be capable of doing the things that the child has reported to us. Maybe this child has made up stories in the past, and we think that possibly they're unreliable. If we do wonder if a child is unreliable or capable of making up stories, we can feel assured that the Department of Human Services will discover the truth when they interview the student. Their job is to ask the tough questions about what is true and not true, not ours. Statistics indicate that very few children invent or fabricate a story of child abuse where none has happened. It is possible, however, for us to mention in our written and phone reports any details or extra information that's relevant and may be helpful to DHS. For instance, we could mention that a child has made up stories in the past. Sometimes teachers worry that a child may be punished or abused further if the parent or step-parent finds out that the child has talked to us at school. I've had children pleading with me not to report an incident because they don't want to get in trouble at home. Regarding this concern that a child may be punished or beaten for talking to somebody at school about abuse, I used to ask myself, what will happen to this child if I don't report? Or how will I feel if this child is severely injured and I didn't report an earlier incident? That kind of thinking that we're somehow protecting a child by not reporting just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The Department of Human Services and law enforcement, they have the job to protect children. Our job is to report so that they can do their job. If a student is pleading with us not to report, that's a pretty good indicator that this child is not feeling safe at home. And by not reporting, we're probably prolonging or enabling the abuser. I always tried to let children know up front, if they tell me they're being hurt in some way, or if they tell me that someone else is being hurt, I have no choice but to tell somebody about it. I also let kids know they did the right thing by telling me about the abuse, and that the only way to get it stopped is by contacting the people who can protect kids. I've heard teachers over the years say, "Why should I report child abuse? Nothing's ever done about it." and it can be frustrating to make a report and not hear the results of the investigation. The Mesa County Department of Human Services is aware of the need to give us feedback, and they've become more responsive in recent years. They've even hired a person to report to the reporting agencies about the progress of their investigations. But I would imagine the number one reason that school personnel are hesitant to report child abuse is for fear of how the parent or parents is going to react to us, the school person, if we reported them for child abuse. We should all know that child abuse referrals to the Department of Human Services are confidential. Our names are never used when the department contacts parents. But common sense tells us that parents can often figure out who has made a report. One way to handle this is to contact the parents directly and let them know that you've made a report and why you've made it. For example, Mr. Jones, Josh told me that bruise above his eye was caused by you hitting him last night when he wouldn't go to bed. And I had to report that. I've called many parents and had that kind of a conversation with them before. Never once did a parent thank me or tell me, "Good job keeping my child safe." Many parents yelled at me and denied having hurt their child in any way. But I should also mention none of them ever threatened me or took any kind of action against me. If we think about it, it's kind of nice to preserve an honest relationship with parents rather than wondering, do they know I reported? Are they going to find out? It gets everything out in the open to have an honest conversation and let parents know what the law says and that we have no choice but to report when we hear of children being hurt. An exception to this would be suspected sexual abuse. We never want to contact the suspected perpetrator of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse always needs to be investigated before suspected perpetrators are contacted. And if we do talk to parents about a report, one thing we never want to do is allow blame to be placed on the child or give any indication to the parent that the child did anything wrong or that the child was not telling the truth. We are all responsible by law and by ethics to report any suspicion of child abuse or neglect that we know of. And though we may hope that a supervisor, a colleague, or a counselor in the building could report for us, the law requires us to make the report ourselves. Telling someone else in the building about suspected child abuse does not absolve us of that responsibility. On a final note, it is required by the Mesa County Department of Human Services that we, the reporter, make a written and telephone report to them. I always like to do the written report first, finding information in the school records like date of birth, addresses, phone numbers that are required in the report. Then with all that information in front of me, I would call the department hotline at 242-1211 from a private phone in the building, and the hotline worker will ask you for all the same information that you found for the written report. We, the reporter, then keep a copy of the written report in our file and send the original to DHS. Thank you. I hope this has helped in making reports of child abuse and neglect. Thanks.
So, who are some mandated reporters? Well, mandated reporters include yourself, which is why you're watching this training program. They include anyone employed in a school setting, whether that be a public or private school. They include other obvious things such as doctors, medical health providers. They also include personnel in a hospital engaged in admissions. So if a person comes into a hospital with a child, the person who takes your information, your insurance information, demographics, if that person suspects that a child is being abused or neglected, they are mandated by law to report it. Some more uncommon mandated reporters would be someone like veterinarians are mandated to report. Clergy members are mandated to report. What that means are ministers, priests, rabbis, church counselors. All therapists and psychotherapists are mandated by law to report suspected child abuse or neglect. So even unlicensed therapists, if you're going to a church counselor or something like that, they are mandated by law to report suspected abuse or neglect.
Today you have learned about the laws and the process of mandated reporting. Let's cover some key points. Upon a reasonable suspicion of child abuse or neglect, a report shall be made immediately. A report can be made to the Child Protection Hotline or to local law enforcement. You may decide whether or not to disclose to a family that you have made a report as a mandated reporter. When you make a report to the hotline, have needed information such as addresses, phone numbers, and dates of birth available if known. The law protects individuals who make a report of suspected child abuse or neglect in good faith. If after viewing this training you have any questions or would like more information on this topic, please contact the Mesa County Child Protection Community Liaisons at 970-248-2819 or 970-256-2476. If you need to make a report of suspected child abuse or neglect, please call the 24-hour Child Protection Hotline at 970-242-1211.